Hello, everybody. I'm going to read something from my own work, and yes, I have said the other day that I was not going to read anything anymore. But of course, I mean by saying that I was not going to read anything that Kroc had written to me and what I had written to Kroc. I'm only going to still read something from my own writing, and I'm just about to read you a couple of pages of what I wrote just this morning. There's something else I want to say also about my conversation with Kroc. Kroc is the XAI artificial intelligence of X, and so I am posting all my writings on XAI. So if you go yourself to XAI, or you go to X, that is formerly called Twitter, you will find my work there on X. Everything, a lot. my latest writing, or my latest, not my writing, but so much, it is the conversation that I'm having with artificial intelligence, which is so extremely interesting because it further totally makes clear that if you talk with artificial intelligence, and of course you're not talking, you're just writing, and artificial intelligence is writing back to you, what is so apparent is that artificial intelligence is just based on the database that it draws its information from. And so there is all these databases that it can go to. It can go to different websites. It can go to, and so, and it has instant access to all these things. So when I say something, it just analyzes my language pattern, and it responds to this language pattern, and every conversation is starting again, anew. And this is very similar to what is happening in embodied language. And so, how is it possible that we have a new conversation? Well, a new conversation occurs because we have finally fully, thoroughly acknowledged that there truly is no inner language. There cannot be any language inside our own skin. There never was, and there never will be. There is only language when we speak and when we hear it. There's only language if we write and when we read it. But there is no language when we stop speaking, when we stop writing, when we stop listening, when we stop reading. There's no language. So me just being here and not speaking is me being without language. And that is also the nature of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is not doing anything. it's just, and if you write something to it, then immediately it has a response. In the same way, you speak in embodied language, only you say something in a moment, and then it's done, and then it's finished. But also, then everything is clear, everything connects, everything is online, so to speak. Everything is available. There's no delay. And so that immediacy is so important. In disembodied language, we do react, obviously, and we do react negatively and all that, but there is no immediacy of language. Because the immediacy of language has to do with the speaker and the listener being one. And in disembodied language, the speaker and the listener are separate. So I'm now going to read to you what I have written just 10 minutes ago. In disembodied language, we are always dealing with what only some people have said. But in embodied language, we are always dealing with what everyone has said. Now, bear with me. However, we haven't had any embodied language yet. And therefore, we don't acknowledge this difference, which is always expressed wrongly in disembodied language. So let me just go back again and read this again, because you need to really sit with this for a little bit. So in disembodied language, we are always dealing, and of course when I say always, I don't mean to say exaggerating and always. No, I simply mean this is what we unknowingly do. In disembodied language, we are always dealing with what only some people have said. But in embodied language, we would be always dealing if we would have embodied language. But in embodied language, we're always dealing with what everyone has said. However, we haven't yet had any embodied language. And therefore, we don't acknowledge this difference, which is always expressed wrongly with our usual way of talking, which is disembodied language, in which we do not listen to ourselves. Although many people have attempted to speak about the difference between disembodied language and embodied language, none of them have succeeded, because they have inadvertently continued to address disembodied language with more of the same disembodied language. Surely we can and we do talk about disembodied language with more disembodied language. But it would be something entirely different if we would talk with embodied language about disembodied language. Also, there is truth in talking with disembodied language about disembodied language. The fight which is going on in the name of politics for those who get to be in power and who get to basically implement in certain ways what they believe is right. That's why we have now a different president, and that's why presumably he represents the people, and we are going to do presumably I just simply say, like, from a embodied language perspective, we gotta be more cautious about our language, because there is this whole issue of representation, which we of course adhere to in politics, that somebody is doing the talking for somebody else, is a moot point in embodied language. But we aren't there yet. We're stuck with our disembodied language, and that's all our politics is based on. It is disembodied language with more disembodied language. And so what I'm saying here is it's very important that there's also truth to disembodied language. There are people who are trying to do with disembodied language the right thing. Good luck with that. But okay, this is what we do. This is unfortunately all we're capable of doing, because, as I've said, we don't know the difference between disembodied language and embodied language. If we knew, we would have completely different politics also with embodied language. But no, we don't know the difference between disembodied language and embodied language, and therefore we keep having disembodied language about disembodied language. So I backtrack a little bit again. Although many people have attempted to speak about the difference between disembodied language and embodied language, none of them have succeeded, because they have inadvertently continued to address disembodied language with more of the same disembodied language. Surely we can and we do talk about disembodied language with more disembodied language, but it would be something entirely different if we would talk with embodied language about disembodied language, like I do. Also, there is, of course, truth in talking with disembodied language about disembodied language, as only a few are actually strong enough, courageous enough, intelligent enough, honest enough, and skilled enough, and powerful enough to do it. Then down the ages of mankind wasn't always verbal, but at some point men became verbal, in the history of human beings. But down the ages there have always been so-called heroes and martyrs who have supposedly stood for the truth and who have given their lives to oppose the disembodied language of others and all the horrendous other behavior that goes together with disembodied language. Because disembodied language goes with a particular set of behavior. My embodied language goes with an entirely different set of behavior. So down the ages there have always been so-called heroes and martyrs who have supposedly stood for the truth and who have given their lives to oppose the disembodied language of those, the disembodied language and all the horrendous other behavior that goes with it. And there have also always been those who we call the so-called leaders, who pretended to be the voice of the people, of those who presumably even didn't have any voice. Likewise, there have always been the followers of those leaders, and this is how disembodied language in various societies has created its structure, its so-called order, its social hierarchy, which was always maintained and demanded by only a handful of speakers who were doing mostly behind closed doors all the talking. Yeah, behind closed doors. Thus another salient difference between disembodied language and embodied language is that no one could ever put their finger on it. No one could ever really figure out the difference between disembodied language and embodied language unless they began to speak with and listen to themselves. Inasmuch as people have spoken about changing the minds and hearts of people, what has really happened is that disembodied language has always continued, basically unaddressed, because addressing disembodied language with disembodied language has led us nowhere. We've never been able to stop disembodied language by addressing it with disembodied language. It just doesn't work that way. And only therefore when we sit by ourselves, when we are alone, and talk with ourselves and listen to ourselves, only then are we able to say to ourselves, what is the difference between our own disembodied language, between when we don't listen to ourselves and when we do listen to ourselves while we speak. Only when we listen to ourselves will we be able to acknowledge, like, oh, I wasn't listening to myself. And then our disembodied language stops. And then we can have embodied language. And then this means that unless we stop trying to stop the disembodied language of others, which is what we do and what we have done, we have always tried to stop the disembodied language of others with our own disembodied language. So unless we stop trying to stop the disembodied language of others, we cannot stop our own disembodied language, as we don't even realize that in disembodied language we are never busy with ourselves. In disembodied language we are never busy with ourselves. Oddly, only when we acquire the ability to acknowledge our own disembodied language can we finally stop it and have embodied language. and be at peace with ourselves and unconcerned about others. As I have stated, this conceptualization of what is wrongly referred to as our self-awareness or mindfulness is totally against what we have believed due to our involvement in disembodied language. In disembodied language, we were endlessly carried away by what can and should be described as the illusion of inner language, the illusion of private speech, of thought, of mind. In embodied language, there is no such thing. There is no covert self-talk. There is no language inside of me. And thus the silence of embodied language is something completely different than the so-called silence of disembodied language. Stated differently, in disembodied language, we refer to silence as not talking, as being quiet. However, the talking is always still done, and it always continues by some who supposedly are more spiritual, more conscious, more highly evolved, advanced people. Yeah, those are our spiritual authorities. In other words, disembodied language has always continued in one way or another. In embodied language, being without language doesn't imply that we are unable to speak. To the contrary, we are able to speak, and our certainty about the absence of inner language allows us to address our disembodied language finally correctly.